My name is Fawn Douglas. Hagadawak, Fawn, Nick Nuwuvi. I am Southern Paiute. I also have roots in I'm a member of Las Vegas Paiute tribe, but I also have roots in the Moapa Band of Paiutes, the Southern Cheyenne, the Muskogee Creek, and the Pawnee Nations. And it's a joy to be here for the second session of the symposium to listen to a panel of female artists and how we balance, because the word WAH-NEE in the Southern Paiute language means balance. So how do we balance all of the things? How do we balance being teachers and students at the same time? How do we balance being, language carriers and language learners? How do we balance being mothers, daughters, sisters, people in the movement? How do we balance all of the things that are around us? And how do we show this balance within our art practice through the different styles of mediums that we use? And so this is a cultural storytelling. This is a cultural storytelling from very diverse backgrounds, because it isn't just one tribal voice. We are not a monolith as Native American people. I mean, there's over 570 plus federally recognized tribes and more so in the United States alone. Each of us with our own language, our own cultures, our own indigenous foodways. And with this exhibition, we're covering, just a portion, just some of the indigenous artists from the Southwest, some females that I look up to very much, and females that I've, really grown to love and get to know, through this journey. So we're going to have a couple of people that are going to be joining me in the panel today. But first, I wanted to introduce, and thank the partners. Let me thank the partners first and foremost, because there's so many people who made this exhibition and the symposium happen, and without all of these people, it wouldn't happen. And over the course of my time here in the Masters of Fine Arts program, it has really been eye-opening to learn about the art world, to learn about all of the things it takes to run an exhibition, to curate a show, to gather as many artists as we did, to be able to communicate with other organizations, other entities, and what it means to maneuver through, working through an institution. All while, trying to stay true to my roots and stay true to the lands, because UNLV is on Southern Paiute land. This institution was built on our Paiute lands. So what does it mean as an Indigenous artist and student to come back here and to pay honor to that, to pay honor to my ancestors, to pay honor to the peoples that are here today and the future ancestors of tomorrow. So with that, I want to thank the partners who have joined us as allies in this mission of uplifting Indigenous voices. The UNLV College of Fine Arts, the UNLV Marjorie Barrick Museum of Art, UNLV's Paul Harris Theater, UNLV's Native American Alumni Club, the UNLV Minority Serving Institutions Student Council, our American Indian Alliance, the Department of History, the Department of Anthropology, and the Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies Department, as well as the Cosmopolitan Hotel, Las Vegas, Nevada Museum of Art, the Nevada Indian Commission, the San Manuel Band of Mission Indians, the Las Vegas Paiute Tribe, Southern Nevada Conservancy, Black Mountain Institute, Meow Wolf, Desert Arts Action Coalition, I got a slide, there, Nevada State Assembly member Howard Watts, WESTAF, the Western States Arts Federation, the National Endowment of the Arts, and the Nevada Humanities. And from my heart, I thank all of you for walking this path of WAH-NEE with us. And thank you so much. So I'm going to be introducing the moderator for today, but I also wanted to take note of who our artists were earlier this morning. I was really taken away by our councilwoman, Elfrida Mitri's amazing words about our lands and our people and how we identify with those lands. That I missed these bios from our artists, with just a short blurb. So I wanted to take a moment and just recognize the three artists that were here today. Noel Garcia, she's based in the Chicago area. Noel Garcia is an artist and educator who focuses on themes of identity, family history, and recovered narratives in her work. She is an Indigenous artist from the Klamath and Paiute tribes. She earned her BA from the School of Art Institute in Chicago and her Master of Fine Arts from UNLV. Her paintings, drawings, and soft sculptures have been exhibited in galleries and institutions across the United States. Garcia has earned awards and fellowships at various institutions, such as the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian, the Nevada Arts Council, the Illinois Arts Council, and the American Indian Graduate Center. We were also joined this morning by Loretta Burden. Loretta Burden has been recognized, Loretta moved to Las Vegas, Nevada in the 70s and recognized that there were not a lot of basket weavers in southern Nevada. So she learned how to make baskets and her passion grew. Loretta has exhibited her contemporary as well as her traditional baskets in libraries, art shows, and juried art fairs. Her artwork has since been featured in the Basket Weavers of Tradition and Beauty, Common Thread Traveling Art Exhibit, Deeds to Buckskin. She has also worked with the Clark County Heritage Museum, creating the first Nevada Native American Arts and Crafts exhibit, as well as a Native American basket exhibit at the McCarran International Airport. We're also joined by Cara Romero this morning. Cara is a contemporary fine art photographer, an enrolled citizen of the Chemehuevi Indian tribe, and she was raised between contrasting settings, the rural Chemehuevi Reservation in Mojave Desert and the urban sprawl of Houston, Texas. Romero's identity informs her photography, a blend of fine art and editorial photography, shaped by years of study and a visceral approach to representing Indigenous and non-Indigenous cultural memory. So I just wanted to give those three artists that recognition now. I know we got to know them through their talk and through their stories, but I also just wanted to be able to, express a little bit more about who these amazing artists are. And I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Dr. Erika Abad is a mentor of mine, and I'm currently taking her class, and she has graciously accepted the position of moderating this discussion of these Indigenous artists. So I'm going to thank her. Thank you from my heart for being a part of this. Dr. Erika Gisela Abad has taught for the Interdisciplinary Gender and Ethnic Studies Department since the fall of 2016. She has taught courses across the Latina, Latino, Gender and Sexuality, and Interdisciplinary Studies programs. She has created courses exploring mother and daughter dynamics through a Latina feminist lens, in addition to exploring race, gender, and sexuality in media representation and fandom. She's been featured in local news outlets talking about the significance of Latinx, queer of color characters, and the lasting impact of Marjorie Barrick Museum exhibits. So I would like to call Dr. Abad up to the stage, as well as our artists, Natani and Rose.
Thank you, Fawn, for inviting me. One of my joys in collaborating with local artists has been collaborating with local artists of color. As a queer woman of color of Puerto Rican and Dominican descent, I know what it means to not have a lot of us in the room or in spaces or in museums. And so I'm glad to be here in solidarity with the Indigenous communities and artists here today. Given some of the questions I had asked earlier, I wanted to start this conversation a little differently, borrowing from my colleague, Dr. A.B. Wilkinson's question of, can each of you tell me a story about, what was it? Yeah, a fun story about creating a piece or a series of pieces that are near and dear to you.
Thank you for that question, but I didn't introduce Rose and Natani. It's not me.
Ooh, sorry. My bad. Linear time is funny. So Natani Notah is an interdisciplinary artist and educator. She's an enrolled member of the Navajo Nation and is also of Lakota and Cherokee descent. Her current art practice explores contemporary Native American identity through the lens of Dene womanhood. Notah has exhibited her work at institutions such as Apex Art in New York City, NXTHVN New Haven, Tucson Desert Art Museum in Tucson, Gas Gallery in Los Angeles, the Holland Project in Reno, Manic Contemporary in Chicago, Access Gallery in Sacramento, Soma Arts Cultural Center in San Francisco, and elsewhere. Notah has received awards from Art Matters, International Sculpture Center, and the San Francisco Foundation. Her work has been featured in Art in America, Hyperallergic, Forbes, and Sculpture Magazine. She has had artist residencies at the Vermont Studio Center, Grounds for Sculpture, Headlands Center for the Arts, and This Will Take Time, Oakland. Currently, she is a 2020-2021 Cala Art Institute Fellow and an instructor for Stanford Continuing Studies. Notah holds a BFA with a minor in Feminist, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from Cornell University and an MFA from Stanford. Rose B. Simpson is a mixed media artist from Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. Her work engages ceramic sculpture, metals, fashion, performance, music installation, writing, and custom cars. She received an MFA in ceramics from Rhode Island School of Design in 2011, an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts in 2018. She is in collections and museums across the continent and has exhibited internationally. She lives and works from her home in Santa Clara Pueblo and hopes to teach her young daughter how to creatively engage the world. And last but not least, Fawn Douglas is an Indigenous American artist and enrolled member of the Las Vegas Paiute tribe. She also has roots in Moapa Paiute, Southern Cheyenne, Creek, and Pawnee tribes. She is dedicated to the intersections of art, activism, community, education, culture, identity, place, and sovereignty. Within her art making and activism, she tells stories in order to remember the past and also to ensure that the stories of Indigenous peoples are heard in the present. Her studio practice includes painting, weaving, sculpture, performance, and activist art, and humor. She is currently working on her Master of Fine Arts in the Department of Art here at UNLV. Through the MFA program, she serves as a graduate student assistant and co-curates with an artist team the Vegas Institute for Contemporary Engagement, which has been a catalyst for exhibitions, podcasts, interviews, performances, and experimentation that makes space for marginalized artists in the Las Vegas community. Thank you for joining us today. I will repeat the question in case it was forgotten. Happy accidents. So, again, starting where we left off at the last panel, could you share with us a fun story about your relationship with a particular project you were working on?
Should I go first?
Go ahead, Natani.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'll start us off. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I'm Natani. I am currently based in Tulsa, Oklahoma, actually, and I'm really happy to be here. So I flew out here yesterday, and I've just been so welcomed, and just wanted to start out that way, thanking you all for showing up too, and just really grateful. To answer the question, the first thing that comes to mind is actually taking it back quite a few years when I first learned how to bead. So that was taught to me by my sister. And I think that came up for me because we started beading around the kitchen table, and during that time when I'm making art, I'm actually in conversation, and we're just joking, talking about life, and I think that brings me a lot of joy and is very, very fun, and it's less serious than when I'm in the studio working on my own. And I find though that's really powerful, right? We tell stories and we connect, and it's this shared experience, and I feel like my work absorbs all of that energy in some capacity. So that led to a project that took me 2 years to complete. It was a project in a series titled 7 Generations of Bolo Ties, and it was kind of these abstract large medallions, and the bolo ties grew into these really large bolo ties. So they were ranging from 5 to 6 feet tall, and they were installed in a space where they would float, and when you interacted with them, the way that I intended it was that each one of them was its own distinct body, but when you kind of saw them together, they were this line of in my opinion, kind of like frontline workers or activists, and so it took me 2 years, and that all came from kind of the joy and the fun of beating around the kitchen table. And now that work is going to be acquired pretty soon, and that's pretty amazing and exciting that something can kind of be recognized after so many years of work and energy that went into it.
Can you hear me? Yeah, all right, cool. I'm smiling. I'm happy to be here. It's strange. As this is I think one of the first times I've spoken in person, so it's cool. It's also strange to be speaking through a mask and looking at not being able to read your faces. So I just wanted to put that out there. And if you can hear me all right, I'll keep going. I was just thinking about what you were saying, that we spend a lot of time in the studio alone, or at least I do. And what makes something fun? I don't know if I would call my process fun necessarily. It's very intense and deep and introspective and heavy lots of times. But when I think about fun, I think about community, right? And sort of that process of making with community. After I had received my master's at RISD, I went home to Española, New Mexico, to Santa Clara Pueblo, which is directly adjacent to Española, which is the lowrider capital of the world. And I went to school at Northern New Mexico College for automotive science and auto body, which is collision repair. It's paint and body. But it's in my town is lowrider school. And so, I went from RISD to lowrider school in Española, and that was one of the best decisions I think I made at the time, because it really deconstructed the arts hierarchy, and it really put you in a really grounded space. And the teacher asked everyone, what's your name and what are you bringing? And so it was like, my name is Lucas and I have a 64 Impala, and then I had to, my name is Rose and I have a 68 Buick Skylark and a 85 Ford F-150, and there was this deconstruction of the hierarchy and that privilege, and that community was rebuilt, and I found it really super important to sort of re-ground myself into community, into value systems based on real conversations and survival techniques or tactics around community, and the people that were there in that program were there to keep them alive. They weren't there for some sort of class privilege. They were there to stay alive. The other options were not, an aesthetic or applied aesthetic love of something really dearly. And that was one of the high points in my life, was going to school there and being there in that community and having the girls' bathroom be super clean. There were no other girls in the program. I could have put a cot in there instead of my office. That was a really beautiful process. So I got an 85 El Camino when I was in school there, and I ended up painting it similar to traditional pottery of the neighboring tribe of San Ildefonso, after Maria Martinez, a potter, which I did a performance at the Denver Art Museum in 2014, and then the car went on tour for a few years through the Hearts of Our People exhibit. And I think that, that was a really fun experience. That was fun, and then cruising, and, we'd take all of our half-painted cars, and there's like body filler, sanding, like little pieces of sandpaper flying off, and we drove through town. We'd all go get some tacos in our half-done cars. Good times.
Cool. Thank you. When I think about a fun experience or things that fill my heart, I think about connecting with other artists and just kind of sitting here really getting in a moment that I'm sitting next to Rose B. Simpson on a panel. Ooh! And then Natani is right there. This is really, that's really cool for me. But I was thinking about just my art practice and how I like to use, found materials, and just thinking about Loretta Burden, how she talked about basket weaving earlier, and using what's in her environment. And also, kind of, like she said, kind of cheating a little bit, using synthetic materials, things she's bought or purchased. But one of the fun moments for me when I created the Nuwuvi basket that's at the exhibition at the Donna Beam Gallery is I call it traditional in the sense that I foraged out within my environment. I found those pieces of conduit wire that were laying on the ground in the new art facilities that we're rehabbing. And so there's a big pile of these wires that were everywhere. So I took them, left some tobacco, and started playing with them, and start to make this woven object, and even having some funny moments in it, because when Loretta talks about you use your teeth a lot, use your mouth to split the willows, split it in 2 or 3, or if you're a badass, 4. But you're using your mouth, and even when you're putting the willows through, sometimes there's a point where you pull it back with your, get a grip of it and pull it back with your mouth. And I had moments when I was working with wire as conduit where I naturally just wanted to bite it, to bite the wire. There were so many times I had to just stop myself, like, what am I doing? I probably had a chip in my tooth if I went forward with it. But yeah, those moments just being alone in the studio, and to have those, those fun moments that are, kind of silly, but also just thinking about, how we're changing things, and how our practice is changing with the environment, and how important that is too.
Yeah, that also reminds me, I do include some found objects in my work too, and I'll go to like thrift stores or garage sales sometimes, and so it's like this kind of a scavenger hunt, kind of responding to things that I'm attracted to and then buying them, but in that process you're seeing a bunch of different random weird stuff along the way, and that I find is really fun. And then this idea about like picking up something maybe in your walks, it led to a series of work where I was taking some kind of debris off the side of the road and turning it into these kind of abstract weird sculptures. But the funny part of it was one of them got selected for an exhibition, and I needed to wrap it and ship it. And on the day of shipping it, something kind of broke off the side, so I needed to go and fix it. But I was on the road to go to like the FedEx, so I had to stop off at a Target parking lot to run in to get super glue, to go back to the piece to fix it, to then wrap this kind of crazy weird sculpture in a Target parking lot. And so you had these people kind of staring, and they're like, what is this like woman doing in this Target parking lot with super glue and like some strange like sculpture? It was just totally like off the wall, kind of weird. And so I joke about that with a lot of my friends, artist friends. We have these stories of like being in these very funny, weird situations that you can't make up those kinds of stories. I guess it's just a lifestyle.
I always tell myself when I go to the dump,
Yeah.
I have to come back with less than I took. One time I had like 16 bicycles in the back of my truck. I was like, oh man, no. So much potential everywhere.
So much potential.
Yeah, resourcefulness.
So much potential.
Yeah, but that has to make a good thing.
Yeah, I have that problem with cars.
That reminds me of my call center days. I was a PhD who said, I'm not working full time, I'd rather have insurance. So I worked at a call center for 2 years. My mic is off. That reminds me of my call center days, which are post-PhD, because the economy sucks. I convinced the call center to let me compost, and for context, I lived in Portland, which had a citywide program. And I was working second shift, and I was taking a grocery cart full of compost to my house about twice a week. It was awesome, and I wrote about it because there I was, PhD, composting at a call center. Right? Because we work with what we've got. And in terms of working with what we've got, it makes me think about, right, in terms of having sat with your pieces yesterday and having dinner with you yesterday, what it means to work with what we've got. And in light of the pandemic, how has the pandemic shifted that adaptability for you as artists, as stewards to your community, and all of the other roles you have or take on?
Yeah, I can start. I think for me, this idea of kind of making the most with the least has been something that's informed my work and my life, really. You know, I grew up, my father like worked, but he worked as a welder, so the kind of money that he was pulling in wasn't always like a lot, and we had a lot of hard times that our family was hit with. So I didn't grow up with a ton of like material things, but I grew up in a family that always supported my dreams and aspirations. So going into art seemed like a good option, and it was supported. So I think that has woven itself into my practice, where I see value in things that are discarded or often overlooked, and I can see that potential. So I will incorporate it into the work. I'll pick it up off the side of the road and bring it back to my studio, wash it, polish it, adorn it, and then put it out into the world. And in my ways, I'm thinking about it as giving it a second life, a second chance at life. Because in my personal life, I feel like I'm so fortunate to be here, and I want my work to have the chances that I have also been given based off of the sacrifices that my family have been through. So that's kind of the first part. And then to more directly answer the question about how the pandemic has influenced my practice, last year I had many things lined up, right? Because as a working artist, I was working like 3 jobs, and I was getting side gigs, and the hustle was real in order to support my practice. And I often have to think a year or sometimes 2 years in advance to make sure that I have everything lined up so I can pay the bills, to be honest. So I had everything lined up, and then the pandemic hit. It was affecting everybody, and all of the things I had lined up got canceled or postponed indefinitely. And I was facing the possibility of like losing like my apartment. There was very, very real-time things that came up for me. And so what I ended up doing was putting off to the side in my living room, making half of it into a studio. And I had a roommate who was awesome. She was supportive and didn't care that there was like random boxes and things around with materials. She was like, you just gotta do what you gotta do. So anyways, I turned my apartment into my studio, into my office, and was sharing it with people, and just kept making the work. Because I was like, well, I know that this is just for a time, and I'm very used to kind of working through hard times. So I'm going to work through this hard time and see what comes from it. So my work became a bit more mobile. It became the scales became a little bit smaller because of the space that I was working in, and the making the most out of the least, or saying the most out of the least, I think has just always been there. So a continuation, but I definitely had to adapt and kind of think more strategically about what projects I was working on.
I liked what you said about like making the most of the least, right? So I generally like to think when I'm approaching my work that we take natural resources to create what we're making, right? So for me, because I use a lot of ceramics and clay, steel, I use glue, I use leather, I use fabric. I think about the change that work is going to make in the world, right? And so I try and be conscious of the resources that I take from this planet, and I think about how, I'll make it right, like plants and animals die for us to be here every day. and we better be doing something, you know, for my own belief systems, that we better be making it right, taking that resource and making it right. And I think about materiality during this pandemic and some of the sort of subjects and experiences we've had to navigate. Some really intense stuff, really intense stuff. Some heavy stuff to carry by way of not material, but actually conceptual and psychological and spiritual weight. And so I think that this time is really, it's exhausting in a creative process. It's absolutely exhausting. And in a sense, like the change that you want to create, if you don't see it very clearly, it's kind of this idea that's kind of cool, and you're pushing for this idea, or maybe you have this experience and you're trying to push that. But when you're like, when it becomes that real, when it becomes that like much of a punch in the gut, you really gotta kick it into high gear. It's heavy, man. It's a lot, you know. It's a lot of work. And sometimes I've been working in clay since I was a little kid, so it's very second nature. It was also given to me genetically. And yet I'll be in the studio and I'll be working and I'll go home and I'm washing dishes and I just like collapse because I'm so tired. I'm like, why am I so tired? That doesn't make any sense. And I have to think about, the thoughts and the grinding of teeth through the day as you're working and what you're trying to deal with and all of the information that you're receiving and the heartbreak that you're having to process while you're making this work. It's a lot, you know. I think it's been more heavy and impacting than ever in my life. And I'm actually incredibly grateful for this, because I feel like this kind of muscle that I'm building and the kind of muscle we're all having to build, whether we're thinking critically, we're questioning what we're told, those kinds of muscles that you start building, when we come out of this on the other side, we're going to be way stronger if we do that work, right? So it hasn't been fun in any way, shape, or form. I don't think fun is the word I would use. But I think it's important. I think it's really important. And I'm rooting for us all.
I'm just amazed that you could all still produce art through the pandemic. In the beginning, I thought it was, I don't want to say thought it was a joke, but I was like, all right, there's a lot of time here. I'm, home, or I can go to my studio. I could do, all these wonderful projects I've been wanting to do. And even thought I was going to start up some beadwork, started to make a cool thing, and everything just fizzled. Like my heart wasn't in it, my feelings weren't in it. It was just like a internal sadness, and I couldn't create the way I could. My first semester here, I was cranking out work every single week, just making something new, and just like I was just running. It was cool. Like I was just so inspired and happy and motivated and all of the positive words you can think of. And then everything shifted, because it was also shifting with the time of George Floyd and all of the different activisms that were happening. And my activism shifted at the same time. I had to think about, my art practice, my process, and like, all right, if I'm not making, what are we doing within the community? What are we doing as leaders in the community to make things better or right, or to try to process what's happening around us? And so, I'm also, I speak on different issues, and I wear a lot of hats here in the city too, not just being, a co-owner of Nuwuvi Art, but I was also with the Institute for Progressive Nevada, and we have this platform, to let people understand about what's happening with all the racisms that were happening at the time. So I developed the 846 Anti-Racism series, because with the Battleborn Progress and the Institute for Progressive Nevada, we had this audience that is predominantly Euro-American. And here are all these people that are questioning, why are, people of color standing up for this, or why do people care about this? Well, we're gonna teach you how. This is why. And with that audience, we were able to educate those who didn't understand why people were, fighting the system that has been, holding us down. Not just Indigenous people, of course, African American people, and other marginalized communities. So my art practice and my work shifted into more writing and lecturing and speaking. Even now, I mean, I haven't really made a lot of art. I was kind of feeling bad about it, to be honest, that I am not, producing as much as I used to in the beginning. But I am making a lot of just steps and moves towards, of course, this exhibition, curating it, it's a lot of work. And doing all of that, but a good friend here, Ty, reminded me that, there's a balance. It's not always just, making and, painting or doing, but it's also all those other things within our art practice, in curating and writing and connecting. So yeah, definitely during this time of the pandemic, there's been a strong shift, because if I'm not completely happy, I'm not making anything. I'm just kind of, I feel like, droopy. And yeah, unless I really kick it into, just doing something just silly. Like, oh yeah, I made a costume, my fry bread costume, that made me really happy. I just did one of my soft sculptures called Stings Like Grease. And I was like, this would probably make a good costume. So I sewed a backing onto it, and I was a big fry bread with a little honey. I don't know, what was the question again? I'm sorry. But yeah, sometimes I like to do, it's not always so political and heady, I like to do some, fun things. Because it's like our stories as Indigenous people aren't always sad stories. We don't always have the sad history. Yes, we do have our histories, and there are a lot of things that are happening today, tomorrow, yesterday. But, we're also, we have this humor, we have this thing that keeps us going. And, sometimes it's fry bread. Shit.
I do love me some fried bread. It's been too long. It's been too long. We fix that. As I'm listening to your answers, the thing, right? There's who we were before the pandemic, and there's who the pandemic is going to make us, to kind of paraphrase what Rose was talking about. And so I guess in that vein, thinking about when you first decided to pursue art as a career or as ceremony, what has changed from the onset to now, I guess, given your formal training as well as your resilient Indigenous women training and practice?
Ooh. That's a complicated, long journey, and yeah, so I'll try my best. For me, growing up, I always was drawing or doodling. My favorite class was like art class, or if the teacher incorporated art into the curriculum or project in some way. So I felt like I was good at it, I guess. Because my teacher would like hold my thing up, or pull me off to the side and say, hey, like maybe you should think about this a little more. So I come from a family that's very creative. My siblings, like my brothers, are musicians and writers. My sister is also, she was the one that taught me how to bead. My father, he was a dancer, and so he'd make all the regalia and make our regalia too. So, and a welder, he would put together aluminum benches, aluminum seating for like large stadiums predominantly. But then during like Christmas time or birthdays, he would take all the scraps at the aluminum yard, and he would make these really weird sculptures, and he would give them to family members. So like, I don't know, I was surrounded by art, and it was important in my household and respected. So I always knew that I wanted to go down that route. So for college, I went in as an art major. I graduated as an art major. And then when I was thinking about, after graduation, I wanted to make a career out of it. So the path that I had seen other artists that I looked up to, they had went to get their MFA. I was like, oh, maybe, okay, I could do that. So I pursued getting my master's, and I learned a lot along the way. Right? I went to schools that were predominantly research institutions that had an art department within the research institution. And those programs were very interdisciplinary, so they encouraged you to take classes outside of the art department, and I feel like that enriched my education because I was having these very interdisciplinary across fields conversations. And I appreciated my experience, and after graduating with an MFA, you can teach. And so I've been, for the past few years, teaching to support my art practice, and then obviously picking up other kind of creative side hustles like curation or commissions to do certain projects, or guest lecturing, so somebody will have me come in and talk to their class. I did some graphic design, you know, kind of just anything to have it all support your work. So yeah, my education journey has been really long and spread out over time, and I've learned a lot along the way. And yeah, I think that's kind of where I'm at with that. And so the second part about the kind of my identity and how that's informed it, I think that that's a balance, right? There's some negative things that have happened. The education systems weren't necessarily built for Native students to succeed. So I feel like I've broken through a lot of barriers. And my idea is that if I go to school, I can kind of infiltrate, and then I can help be someone that is a change maker. And I think that art is also about making change and inspiring others. So I think that it's like the perfect balance of the two. I picked a career that I can celebrate myself, but I can also lift others up along the way. And it's always, for me, about breaking boundaries and rules and questioning everything. So,
yeah. Is my mom here? No, okay. Is that her name right there? I'm just kidding. But, so, I didn't want to be an artist. Because my whole family were artists, and I grew up in a world of artists. And when I was a kid, I used to build those little. I'd save up all my money. I'd go catch grasshoppers. If I got my mom a jar of grasshoppers this big for the turkey, she'd give me like 25 cents. Or I'd get like those plastic trash bags, and I'd collect cow dung, the dried stuff, and give it to my aunties to fire their pots, and we'd get like 50 cents for a bag like that. And I would save up my money, and I'd go to Hobby Lobby, and I'd get those little fighter jet plastic models with the glue, and I'd put them together, and I'd paint them all cherry. And they'd hang all over my ceiling. So my bedroom when I was a kid had all these airplanes on the roof. Then I had my own logo, and they were all like all the same colors. It was the right fleet. And so I wanted to fly fighter jets. And when I was in high school at the Santa Fe Indian School, you know, they send the recruiters to school, and I took the ASVAB, and I got a really, really good score. And they called my house. My mom hung up on them. And then I heard about it. Do you want to kill people? I was like, no, I don't. I just wanted to fly their planes, you know. And so I had a really good talking to. But I think one of the reasons that I think that I've had, like many of us, a very multifaceted experience of trauma. And that multifaceted experience of trauma, being a mixed blood person or a person that's white passing, growing up on the res, in a family, my mom chose to homeschool us. So my mom was basically a hippie on the res, and we grew all our own food. I didn't go to school. She went to the dump, and she cut the tires to make us shoes because she saw the Tarahumaras do it. So that's what we wore in the town, you know. And so I think that, you know, and all the traumas that come with post-colonial stress disorder, you know, all the abuses of that. And I think because I had this very interesting perspective of watching the world, I've always watched the world very critically because I never fit. or never understood how I fit in it. I criticized what we were calling Indigenous and the pride that I saw that was so broken and hurt. And we were not having that conversation. We were not having so many conversations that I so desperately needed to have. And I was angry. I was really angry. I wanted to go really fast in the sky until I could crash and die, right? I wanted it. That's what I wanted to do. And when I went to UNM for undergrad, and I took ceramics as an easy credit because I grew up with clay all the time, so I took ceramics as an easy credit, and we started building conversations in class, and I was so caught by the power these conversations could bring. I studied flamenco, I studied creative writing, and even in my creative writing classes, you know, there wasn't that kind of power that those conversations in those classes had. And so it fed me, it began to feed me, and it began to give me hope that there was something to, you know, I was out running around painting trains and headed for disaster pretty quick. And I found out that, you know, that aesthetic had a voice, and that voice could save us. That voice could really save us. And so I kept speaking it to stay alive. And I kept listening to everyone else's so that we could build a reason to keep going. And I'm still alive, right? And now I have my daughters over here playing with these pipe cleaners with Claire, you know, and now I have something to live for and something I care so deeply about to keep going. And this voice has to be strong, and it has to scream, and it has to make change, and it has to question everything that we thought was true. Everything that we take for granted. When we stop questioning the things that we think is true, we've stopped growing. And I think we're at this point, this threshold, this tipping point, where we gotta really make some big lasting change. And this is the tool that I found that does the best with that. And so that's why I do this. And I'm not flying a fighter jet. My mom would be pretty mad. But I figured out I go pretty fast in some cars that I built, so that kind of meets that. But now that I have a little girl, I can't go that fast anymore.
So just to clarify, was the question about like the educational journey and maintaining identity?
Artistic journey, formal and informal. Formal as an artistic journey, formal and informal.
Oh my gosh, my artistic journey actually started as an adult, because when I was younger, I mean, I was always an artist, but in this colonial world, I didn't understand how to, you know, make a living off of that. So initially I went to school for marketing and business and communications, and it wasn't until I was, you know, my late 30s that I pursued my art career. I was like, you know, I'm an artist. Why am I denying myself who I am? And so I got my BA here at UNLV in 2015. The last year of my master's now. I just learned to paint a few years ago, and I never even knew about oil painting or anything until, a few years ago. My art process and journey has been here. And I've been happy about that too, because I'm here on my own homelands. And the department here is really great, and everything I want to seek out, I seek out. And if I want to learn about my people's histories, I mean, we have the special collections here, so I feel like I'm in a really poised space to study my culture, my history on my people's lands, and so I'm really grateful for that. But my artistic journey has been difficult. I feel like I'm always trying. There's been more failures than successes, but a lot of people don't see those things. I think that's with any artist too. We don't exactly put out there the blooper reel of our our failed experiments. But you know, just even maintaining identity and trying to do this artistic practice and staying true to who I am is learning about who I am. Who am I as an Indigenous woman? And there's more questions around that, around my identity. There's an artist I look up to, his name's Gerald Clark, and I got to hear him speak at one of our lecture series, and he was talking about, you know, as we introduce ourselves, you know, when I introduce myself, it's always, you know, Nick Nuwuvi, you know, like I am Paiute, you know, and then I start to talk about my different tribes. I never say I'm part Scottish and Irish. I never get to say that, and I'm only just seriously warmed up to it, not even a year ago. But I'm still trying to slip into it as I'm learning about, you know, well, this is all of me. This is a part of me. Why deny who my father is, or, you know, the part of who he is, or, you know, my grandmothers or my great-grandfathers, and so on and so forth. You know, why deny that part? And so there's a part of me who has to unlearn, you know, those things. I actually asked my Aunt Suzanne once, because there's this beautiful book called Nation to Nation, and it was produced from the Smithsonian's National Museum of the American Indian. It was this beautiful exhibition that she curated on treaties, on broken treaties. And in the foreword, it talks about our history, and our history all the way back, and it's so beautiful, just the history all the way back to Carlisle. Well, Carlisle Indian School isn't beautiful, but just to see these photographs, these black and white photographs of my great-great-grandparents, and, you know, seeing them in their beautiful, you know, regalia, and then seeing them with their hair short, and, you know, these pictures. And I always asked her, I was like, you know, I love our history, you know, thank you. I'm always just so thankful to her that she preserves this, and so I could share this with my daughter about this preservation of our history. But I asked her, I was like, you know, but what about our other side? I never see anything about that. Maybe it's the reason I don't talk about it. And so I asked her, and then it just broke my heart even further. I just wanted to be a one name like Madonna, just call me Fawn. Like I don't want any part of Douglas, you know, Americanized from McDougal, you know, from that Scottish, you know, clan. Like I don't want any part of it, you know, hearing about the land grabs and the histories and the traumas around it, around, you know, this awful, awful man who tried to murder my great-great-grandmother over the land grabs in Oklahoma. And so when I think about, you know, my art practice and identity and who I am in this journey, it's been a journey of learning and unlearning about history, Native history, my family's history, about who I am, because I feel like that's very intrinsic and woven into every piece that I do. Even the funny ones, you know, I've kind of joked about fry bread. I've even, you know, stitched a small little Indian taco pillow. It's really comforting to me, but very complicated. But, you know, everything has this story to it too, about this, you know, this colonial history, this past, about how that was a survival food, about how that was, you know, something, you know, when the Native peoples are, you know, well, basically chased off of their own lands and couldn't hunt and gather in their traditional spaces, and they were given these rations. You know, there's history to everything, and that's been very much attached to my art practice, is this learning of all of that and an identity.
Thank you. Thinking about the last panel, one of the things they brought up was their attention to audience, whether the audience is their community. Well, their audience is primarily their community, right? For a lot of reasons. So thinking about your craft and your hustle, how do you consider the audience of your work?
Yeah, I think it's like 3 or 4 or 5 parts. The way I think about it is, there's me, and I'm making the work because there's this impulse, there's this desire, there's this need. I have to make it. I feel like I'm channeling something, and it needs to be brought into creation and put out into the world. So I guess I equate it to the analogy of like being like the nucleus, and then there's these rings that are outside of it, because then I consider my family, the ones closest to me, is I want to make them proud. I want to do something that makes them proud of me. And so far, you know, they are proud of me. They're proud of the work that I put out there, and that means everything. And then I think of the communities that I belong to. That can be my own tribal community and communities, but it can also be, you know, the communities and networks that I've built at universities, partnerships with different nonprofit organizations. Like, the list is very long. So I'm thinking about them and how to collaborate or co-sponsor, or how can I use art to put together a workshop where we're having conversations about topics that we are really passionate about, or where art and activism meet, and how can art be used on the front lines. So I'm thinking about that. And then I think of other communities of color, the similarities in some of the histories or moments where that is intertwined, and that we have common goals. We're fighting for human rights often. So if I can be in dialogue with somebody that is fighting for their human rights, or I'm thinking about the Standing Rock, but then I'm also thinking about Flint and the water crisis there, that we have something in common that could bring us together, and potentially, if we unite, there's strength in numbers. And then I think of allies. I think of people outside of my own community, or outside of non-native people, as allies. And how can we work together in order to make sure that the world is a good place for future generations. So it starts with me, and I feel like a ripple effect, and that I have a ripple effect. My work has a ripple effect, and I want to touch as many people as possible in the best ways possible. And so it's very layered and complicated.
In the desire to make change, it's who I talk to and the conversation I'm trying to build is going to change pennies, And so when I'm, one of my cousins came to my studio the other day and he was all, "Rose, your art is ugly." And I was like, "Cool, I didn't make it for you, fool." And that's fine. And if I'm going to have a conversation with my cousin and I need to heal something there, it's going to look different, right? And that because I was trained to speak a certain language, and like you were talking about infiltration, that I feel like we're trained to speak different languages, whether that's material languages, whether that's conceptual languages, whether that's like the art education hierarchy or the Western education hierarchy language that we learn to speak, then we enter into that space and we speak that language to communicate with those people. And I have the privilege of speaking several of those languages, and also the privilege of access into spaces because I can speak those languages to be able to express myself in ways that aren't acceptable in other spaces. And I speak those languages in those places in order to deconstruct and ask questions in those areas. And I often call the art that I like, or the art I'm trying to make, is Trojan horses of consciousness, and how do you enter into those spaces and then deconstruct them from within. And I think that I'm trying to make people uncomfortable, and I think that's part of it, is that you make someone uncomfortable. Yeah, like my cousin doesn't like it. And I'm like, and I don't want my cousin necessarily to be uncomfortable. I want to give him medicine so that he can start deconstructing that internalized colonizer, so that he can start healing himself, because, we got issues. But that's not the issue I'm trying to bring up with him. We know hard, we know broken, we know scratchy, we know ugly. We don't need to know any more of that, right? I built a 1985 Chevy El Camino with the 410 horsepower 350 that hauls ass in the sunset. You know what that makes you feel? That's medicine for Mike, right? And driving in that, with an Indigenous woman, and she starts crying and she says, "This is what I needed this year," But when I'm entering into spaces, where the conversation and the dialogue is based around privilege, and we have those 4 white walls, and we're dealing with that space, and we're trying to deconstruct it, is that what I'm trying to ask is what makes people hurt each other? And what made people hurt each other to start with? What makes us forget to feel each other? What makes us forget that plant? What makes us lose our relationship to the whole world? Because it's when we lose that and we objectify the world that we can go and discriminate and abuse and feel like we have the right to do whatever we want with whoever and whatever we come across. Driving into this valley of this city just made me sick. This is it. We're in it, in the middle of it, right? So my work is about how do we as human beings, because each and every single one of us do this every single day, not one of us is exempt from the colonizer, from this act of objectifying our world. So what I'm trying to do is find those scratchy places, those uncomfortable things inside of ourselves where we hate ourselves enough to numb down, enough to hurt someone else. And I'm going into those places for myself, and I'm trying to do that work through my work and then put it out there and say, hey, I'm trying. Let's all try, you know, and if I can enter into those spaces of privilege, and I can be wrong, but what I assume to be the most destructive places of privilege, of capitalism, of patriarchy that have run rampant across this earth and run rampant across our thoughts every single day. How do I enter into those spaces and make those people begin to feel those, ouch, what hurt me enough so that I turn around and hurt somebody else, including myself, right? That's who I'm trying to communicate with. And so I guess that changes, you know, my audience. We talk about audience. I'm not trying to re-traumatize people who have been traumatized. But I'm trying to communicate that feeling of trauma from a place of knowing that trauma to people who might have inflicted that, and to start asking those deep internal questions of why. And it really is a human thing, right? And I'm trying to reach our own humanity, right? And what happens inside when you are the colonizer and you are the colonized, and you have to live with that, you know? And we have to ask those deep questions. So I guess that's the answer to who my audience is, and you know. I'm really trying to, you know, there's that deep, who do you think you are? You know, who do you think you are? That always is in my head, right? Who do you think you are? And so I think the biggest audience, I think, is myself. And I'm trying to communicate with myself and trying to find that power and that presence and that self-love that's really, you know, can be really hard. It can be super hard. Yeah.
So when you're going through like ways of trying to deconstruct and heal, yeah, let me know how you're doing that, because I feel like I'm still, you know, seeking, always learning, right? Always learning, always searching. And when I think about like the audience for my work, you know, I kind of get a raised eyebrow from some of my people, or that looks a little strange, or and you know, but I think about the stories, and I think about you know, the responsibility of just being an Indigenous woman or being a Southern Paiute woman, and you know, what kind of art that I want to produce. And I think about, like, you know, when I think about audience, I think about my elders. When I think about audience, I think about like my daughter, my people around us, but also, you know, how are other people interpreting this story? How are other people, you know, looking at my work, and how are they able to understand? Because I want people to know, you know, it's not just simply a land acknowledgement, or, you know, that this is Paiute land, but who are we as people? And then not being like that person who is like, all right, this is the story of our people. Like, no, you know, everybody has their own story. What's my story? And, you know, what have I, you know, dealt with? And just thinking about like all the traumas, all the layers of trauma. You know, I do have a number of pieces that, you know, that deal with that, you know, when it comes to sexual assault, when it comes to missing and murdered Indigenous women, when it comes to the rapes of our lands. and all the things that are happening, and even as of recent, with the Air Force wanting to take the Desert National Wildlife Refuge and use it for their bombing exercises. This is the place of my people. This is where the Creator goes to dream. And this is an area that they wanted to take that was supposed to be protected. And so when I think about my audience, I like to create things that do tell that story, but that tell the truth too about what has happened. In the exhibition currently, I have a piece that I have T-shirts, and they're my protest T-shirts. One says, "Don't bomb the bighorn" for our bighorn sheep, like save the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. And on the other side of that T-shirt is when the Reed Gardner coal ash plants closed near the Moapa Paiute Reservation. And it was one of the last coal ash plants, power plants in the States, because of course they've taken them all down in other areas because it's dangerous. It's a health hazard, and people around it have asthma problems and so on and so forth, all these health issues. But because it was next to an Indian reservation, it was okay to be there. And so when it was torn down, it was a big celebration of the people to have that. And and there's like these voids, there's two voids, within this work of art to think about, like that hollow feeling, or that missing, that longing, what is lost, when our lands are destroyed. What happens to our lands, what happens to our people, because we feel that one and the same. And so when I think about my audience, it is, for my Native people, but also for others, for an understanding to, hold in place this object that tells this story of a time in space. And so, and how do I consider it my audience and my hustle? I make the things, and people respond to them. I've only been selling a few pieces here and there, but a lot of them are geared towards land protections, land rights, water protection, and all of that. And there's a number of things that I keep to myself, and that's for me. That's for me to love and me to hold close. And I definitely understand that, we're our own audience too, to create something that we love and can also enjoy.
Thank you. Creating work we enjoy is sometimes laborious. Because as I'm listening to you, what I'm also hearing is the laboriousness is rooted in the fact that they don't want us here. So in that vein, and speaking to something that Natani said earlier, what recommendations do you have for institutions who are working to ensure that the Indigenous have greater likelihoods of what institutions define as success?
Oh, got a lot of thoughts about that because I've been in academia for many years and worked with many people. And I think even this ties back to the last question about this idea of making people uncomfortable. I feel like I go into certain spaces and I do make people feel uncomfortable at times because I walk in and I'm confident and I have opinions and I pull up the seat at the table and I say, hey, this is what I think we should do. What do you think? So that might rub some people in the wrong way at times if they're not used to that. So, but as for advice for institutions that are wanting to do better or increase their diversity and inclusion, or I think that one of the main things is that they need to advocate and actively search out and work with communities, and not in an anthropological kind of pop in and leave, or pop in, take something and leave. It needs to be this long-term relationship. And so I'm finding that one thing is not, one event each year isn't enough. We need to have multiple, or we need to be working with that community for years. It becomes a lifelong relationship, in my opinion, or it should be, it's starting to be. And it's not just a box that you check, or it's not just that like strategic photo where it looks super diverse. It has to be a commitment. And so I often, my advice if I'm ever at the table or part of the conversation or and in communication with the leaders in the room, I'm often like, okay, this is great. And then how can we think about its effect long term for many years to come? And sometimes people are surprised by that because they're like, oh, no, let's just focus on this right now. I'm like, okay, that's good. And then how are we going to replicate this elsewhere or give back continuously? So I think it's like the first thing that comes to mind. And then the second thing is getting more Native Indigenous faculty on board. And there has to be this retention as well. Because I've been on that end of being recruited to teach at a place, but then the retention, like once you get there, isn't up to par, in my opinion. And you kind of get ousted after a while, or you're confronted with so many inequities when you're within that space that it can be kind of alienating or just too much, and you end up walking away. Like I've walked away from certain positions because of that, because it just became too much. And it wasn't good for my mental health, etc. So yeah, this continuous giving back, working with a community long term, and really commitment and investment in that community, getting more Native faculty or staff, like at all levels, right, and students, like at all levels, more Indigenous representation, and retention, really working on retention. It's not just about getting them there. What do you do once they're there? Because even for me, like when I went to college, like I went across the United States, and I went to upstate New York, and I was in a place that it was a culture shock, to say the least. And I found my people, I found my friends, and I found they do have a Native student program there. So it's like you do find your pockets where you kind of feel like you belong. But what about the pockets where you don't necessarily belong, but somebody reaches their hand out or encourages you, or you have that dialogue. So I'm rambling a little bit. I have a lot of feelings about this. I guess to sum it all up, I would just say that there's a lot of work to be done, and that's not something that we should be ashamed of. This isn't gonna be fixed overnight, and it goes back to that long-term thing, right? That this is just, it's gonna take time, and if we're all committed to that, I do see hope down the line.
Right on. Oh dear. Say something nice, please. I have a neural pathway block here because I'm very angry at institutions. And so for me to think constructively like you are is hard. And so I often, I'm grateful for people who have that ability to think like, okay, here's the issue, let's get through it. When I'm emotionally weighted there. I'm on the board of New Mexico School for the Arts, and intentionally to say the things that I'm not supposed to say in that space. Because New Mexico School for the Arts is an arts high school in Santa Fe. It's a blue ribbon school. One of the few, I think the only one in New Mexico. And they're asking me, why aren't there any Native students going to this school? And I was like, because all your little kids are spoiled brats. And they come around and they're all snotty and privileged. And no Native people, especially not Pueblo people, want their kids to go to that school and come home with their nose in there. That's not how we act. Right? That's not how we act. Send them to the Santa Fe Indian School where they'll be around other people who show them how to be good people in the world. And I'm using that as an example of we need to deconstruct the fact that institutions have the power to start with, that we put our value in those institutions. That is a very colonized way of, I don't like using that word, but it's a very disconnected, in a lot of ways, value system. And how do we start reclaiming that value system and saying, where do we put that value? Sometimes there's value in other things, like those kids at the, at the training at the technical school learning how to sand fires, and they shut the program down because no one was graduating. No one was graduating because they got the skill and went out and got a job, and they weren't dead on the side of the road. And yet it's gone now, because the value system was based on this piece of paper that then, it wasn't a lived experience kind of thing. When are we going to teach our kids how to farm, how to forage, how to hunt? How to, our value systems are very skewed, I think. And I often feel like we have these incredible resources that are schools, that are museums, that are educational places. And we're all kind of sitting around picking our nose in so many ways. And I feel like, how do we begin to transform our value systems? Because the value systems is based on taking away people's own power of really supporting themselves. Because when you can grow your own food, when you can build your own place, when you can have land and have relationship to that place, you don't need money. When you don't need money, you don't need them. And when you don't need them, they can't tell you what to do. And when they can't tell you what to do, guess who's scared? And I think that if I could tell institutions anything, really, I'm always interested in what are we scared of? And why won't we look at our fears? Because all of us are holding fears. We've been all have some deeply internalized racism, things like that we don't want to look at. And I think we cover our fears by overcompensating with certain things, or we like to be in control, we like to be in power. And then that fear denial turns into destructive tendencies that we see in so many positions of power or institutions. I would love to see, here's my only constructive criticism is, how do institutions sit down and really think about what are we scared of? Who are we scared is going to have power and why? What happens if we give those people power? What does that mean about me? What does that say about me and my deeply constructive belief systems and power systems inside me? Internalized, value systems that I think have been really destructive. And so, like I said, it's not super constructive. But, I think oftentimes people, there are people out there who want to hear hard things so that we can actually make change and say, hey, we got to look at some really deep stuff. We can't just, do some surface fixes. We got to look at the spine of this whole thing and say, how did this go wrong from the start, and how do we start deconstructing it? But I really do respect people who have the capacity to do that work. And if you have the skill to sit down and make that change, I hope you get paid, and paid good, because that's really important work. And if there's funds there, resources, that is vital. And if you can do that work, and that's hard work, I just hope that the resources are put in those spaces to make that lasting change.
Yeah, to quickly respond to, I think, sometimes I tell people well, this model is just not going to work. You have to start over.
All the way.
Sometimes you need to burn it down in order to build it back up.
Yeah.
And that's not a popular opinion all the time, especially if if it's a major institution, or if it's a board that's been in place for 25 years, and it's like you need to completely switch out all your board members, and it's like, what? No, we can't do that, and it's like, well, that's my opinion. and I think that some things, there are some things in life that you can't fix, and that's really hard to grapple with. And so I appreciate that there's some things that I'm very critical about, and then going back to walking away from certain things, right? It was they were asking so much of me, and they were not paying me, or they were asking so much and disrespecting me along the way, and so I chose to walk away and say no, you can't treat me like this. And I think that's also powerful too, to model that in certain spaces like this, where it's like, no, it's not gonna work. But it's hard, it's complicated.
And it's really scary. I mean, when we talk about looking at our fears, it's like, what? There's a deep fear, and I keep thinking, my great grandma would never have said what I say or can say because she was scared for her life. And that was actually real, right? My grandma could say more because she was that much less scared. Her life was that much less in danger. And on to the point where, you know, we almost have the responsibility to say the things that they couldn't say because our lives are that less in danger. Quite literally, right? And I think, like, when we put value on certain things, we give it power over us as well. And so when you take your power back and you say, hey, you know, I don't have time for this, or, you know, I'm putting my value elsewhere. And when you put your value, you put your energy, you put your care and attention somewhere else, it gives that love and that vibration or energy to something else, you know, and we've been putting so much of it into certain things. You know, there's a lot of strength and power in shifting that focus very intentionally, and that's a lot of fear and a lot of self-love because we've been trained that, you know, certain validation is the end all.
Yeah, I have a lot to say about institutions. I think this is a really good question. I really like hearing what both of you have to say about it too, because when I think about, you know, just the past few years being here, I mean, you know, UNLV once had the little flag symbol on its mascot of the Confederate flag, had Beauregard, the Confederate soldier, on the floor here in the Barrick, because this used to be like the basketball courts and indoor courts. And so that was just removed like last year. And, you know, also just finding mascots, but, you know, these symbols that the University of Nevada, Las Vegas has held close to it for over 50 years or so, or however long it's been here. And so when we think about, you know, like why would myself want to be here in an institution that is this way? I mean, all the institutions, you know, are built on this patriarchal, Euro-American structure and standard. But what does it take if you stick through it to challenge those standards, to make real change? You know, I stuck around and I was part of the Native American Student Association back in 2015 when we're challenging the Hey Red frontiersman, the fun-loving frontiersman mascot. And, you know, just thinking about all the Native children that came through here and we're going to be going to the alumni building after this. I'll talk about that later. But when we do go there, you're going to notice there's an empty spot. You know, this where the sandstone is, and there's a small tree there in a pot. But this big bronze sculpture used to be there of this Hey Red frontiersman. And as we know, in Indian country, a frontiersman's, an Indian killer. Was paid, you know, money to, you know, scalp and kill and eradicate the Native Americans of this west of the area. And so to have this, you know, Indian killer as the mascot, the symbol of the university, was just a slap in the face. I had to walk past it, you know, on my way from the art department to student union, or whenever I was walking back and forth to class. But also, you know, making change about it. I mean, we fought about it. We stood with allies. We stood with, you know, other students of color, you know, to protest about it. You know, and at the moment, the protest was because, you know, they thought it was a Confederate soldier. We need to remove this. So at the time, there was a 60-page report about how, in 2016, how the mascot was not, you know, a Confederate soldier. It's a frontiersman. It's a frontiersman. Everyone calm down. It's just a frontiersman. And so I had to get up and talk and say, yes, it is a frontiersman. It's an Indian killer. So your symbol is still racist. And, you know, and we have to educate about that. When I say we, you know, it's not just myself that's in a fight against this, but many, many others, many professors here, many, you know, people in faculty, you know, that have been trying to change the system and infiltrate from within, you know, as we do. I'm not going to spill the secret sauce, but there's a lot of change that needs to happen, and those changes are also happening now, you know, with the Indigenous women sitting here to tell our stories, to be here, you know, in this space. I mean, even when we think about, you know, the Barrick, you know, thinking about mining, gold mining here in the state of Nevada, you know, there's a lot of, you know, harms that are on the earth currently, all the way through northern Nevada. There are many things that we have to deal with, but where there's also, this time and space where we have to, rise up and talk about those harms and speak on them. What else I want to say to institutions, when we think about the UNLV versus the University of Nevada, Reno, is this north-south rivalry. And when we think about rivalry and what institutions can do better, well, UNR won when it comes to retention of Native American students. Currently, we only have 0.01% of Native American students that are here at this university that claims to be daring, different, and diverse. And our faculty matches that at 4 or 5 Native American faculty in the American Indian Alliance. So when we think about, this rivalry between UNR and UNLV, well, we lost because UNR has a Northern Paiute language program. They have many forums. This is the first of this kind here on this university. And at UNR, they have many. They have a powwow. They have an Indian center for their students. They have a really strong Native American Student Association. We're losing our students to other places like the, in Arizona, I forget, Arizona State, ASU, because they got a strong powwow, strong everything. They have this big support for their Native American students. What have we had over the past few years? When all the tours come through and the retention offices walk all the, the Native students or the students in general, past that Hey Reb statue, they tell them to rub the mustache for good luck. Rub the mustache of the frontiersman for good luck. How many Native students have we lost from these visiting high schools just in those moments? It's like, yeah, rub the mustache of your ancestor's killer. So when I think about, what to say to institutions, we're going to need change, and we're going to need to do it together. I definitely enjoy teaching here, but I'm also seeing a stark absence. There are no tenured positions for people of color in general. We're not seeing many opportunities for people of color or for Indigenous studies. Yes, we have a minor here, but it took a very long time for Dr. William Bauer and many other faculty to get that established, to have a minor in American Indian Indigenous Studies. And even now we need more teachers to be a part of that, to extend that program. Let's see, I had to write these notes down because there's a few. And then when we think about retention of Native students, we're going to need to see our Native students. I would love to see more Natives here at this university that are coming here and hopefully can see this as a catalyst to some small change within the arts, and that there is a presence here. Our Paiute people are here. Our visiting artists from other tribes are here. We want to see you come back. We want to see our Native students to see themselves here and to be a part of it. Let me see, and yeah, so we just got a tuition waiver here in the state of Nevada. On August 19th, 2021, the state of Nevada passed the tuition waiver for in-state Native American students to go to an institution. You have your choices, of other colleges, but it's going to be UNR or UNLV. Where do you think they're going to go? So until we have these structural changes of more faculty of color, more Indigenous faculty in every single department, not just the arts, not just interdisciplinary gender and ethnic studies, but all across the board, not just teaching, but in the staff as well. We're not going to see a lot of change unless we see our people here, and unless our Native students can see themselves here and in the faculty. And furthermore, no, that's good, that's good.
Thank you. To contextualize what Fawn has said, I'm a faculty in residence, and since 2015, the majority of new positions created by this institution have been faculty in residence positions. We teach more, and as public documentation demonstrates, we get paid less. In addition to that, we do not have the security of tenure-track faculty. We teach more, get paid less, and will not have ever the security of tenured or tenure-track faculty. With that said, I want to open it up to the audience and see what questions you have for our artists. Yes?
For the Indigenous Native Nevadans, will it cover like CSN and the other, just knowledgeable people? Will it cover the community colleges?
I think your question is about the,
Sorry, no, I want to repeat your question. I forgot to make that announcement. So the person asked for this waiver, this tuition waiver for Indigenous and Native American students. Is it just for the public institutions of UNR or UNLV?
as I understand it, it's not limited to those two universities, but any NSHE, Nevada State Higher Education. Yeah.
Other questions? Yes. Yes.
For Rose, I was looking over your artwork earlier and I noticed that there's, I mean, there's kind of like a sense of like darkness to it, but it's kind of like almost post-apocalyptic in a sense. Is that purposely done? And if so, is that derived from like any type of literature or like visuals that you see?
Good question.
Rosa, let me I keep turning on and off so you don't record me reading. So the person asked, was referencing Rosa's work in the current exhibit and commented on the darkness of it and asked if there are literary or other references for its leaning towards the post-apocalyptic.
So, like I said, my mom was a hippie. I don't know if you could call a native a hippie, but she was, you know, in the 80s and 90s and started an organization where it was cultural preservation and farming, basically. So ever since I was a kid, I knew that we're in trouble, you know, ecologically in trouble, big trouble. And I actually really believe, because of the information that I was fed since I was little, that the world was going to end when I was like 16, right? And so I kind of lived like, this is it, right? This is it. I'm 38. I'm not there. But I really feel like there's a deep dread. There's this deep dread of what's going on. And so I think when I hit you know, teenage years, I started getting obsessed with post-apocalyptic theory, right? So I started, you know, thinking about all the different perspectives people have of what post-apocalypse looks like, right? From like Waterworld, where what's his name? Kevin Costner, that guy, is like grabbing a tomato by the, you know, the stem and throwing it into a ship, and you know, these kind of, where I understood how life works enough to know that that wasn't possible, right? There's lots of different perspectives of post-apocalypse where, you know, interesting. I got obsessed with it, from like Cormac McCarthy's The Road to Mad Max to The Book of Eli. Lots of movies, honestly. And the more that I delved into that, it was all about, I longed for that innovation, where we get to that point where you let everything go. There's no you're supposed to, no more taxes, no more anything. And you figure it out. You figure it out, and you have the freedom to figure it out. And the aesthetic freedom is actually quite beautiful in lots of ways. And there's a real strong agency in it. When you get to that point where there's nothing left, you know, your agency is on point, right? So you're like, you figure it out. And then the more I started thinking about it, I realized that this is it. This is the apocalypse. Quite literally for humanity. But also it has been for a long time for Indigenous people. And we have been living in an apocalypse for quite some time now. And the innovation in order to survive has been kicked on for centuries at this point. And that's what was kind of, I think was so exciting about post-apocalyptic theory, is because it was familiar, it was understandable, it was, comfortable, for lack of a better word. And I feel like I like to put that kind of energy into my work, because it builds that muscle, the aesthetic muscle of how we can transform, like I said, our objectification of the world, or our ideas, our preconceived notions of what things should be, and start thinking really innovatively and creatively in order to survive. And that survival, the post-apocalyptic kind of aesthetic, isn't just fashion or clothing, but also relationship to material, to planet, and also to our conceptual, psychological, emotional spaces. That innovation has to go all the way to our deep internal spaces. To answer your question? Right on.
You three genuinely seem to like each other, and you were extremely complimentary of each other. And I don't have a lot of exposure to the world of art, but from what I do know, that's not very common. So I wonder if maybe you could address that, dare I say, collegiality and how that can impact your work. Are you inspired by each other?
So Stacy asked that the collegiality among the panelists is rare, and asked if how that came about and if the artists inspire each other.
I don't like these guys.
Yeah, no, I've known about Rose's work for quite a while. I feel like I came across it, I was in class and somebody referenced your work. I was lucky to have some really amazing professors, and anyways, so I've known about your work for a while. Really respect your practice, and so I was really excited when I found out that we were in the same panel. I was like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And then Fawn, oh my gosh, like we met, like earlier this year, or even like, yeah, so it's recent, but I was invited, Wendy invited me to talk to her class, and Fawn was in the class, and it was a Zoom interview, but Fawn was asking me these questions after I gave my artist presentation, and then followed up and reached out and wanted to include some of my work in this exhibition. So just in general, I've come here feeling supported already, and then to have these conversations, even on the side, there's like a lot of production that goes into something like this. We didn't just show up like here. We had dinner the other night, and just in general, I just love seeing people succeeding at what they're doing and doing it really well. And yeah, so to answer it in short, I feel like I'm definitely inspired by these women, and look up to them in a lot of ways too. So it's this exchange.
I don't like this. I'm just kidding. I mean, I know this process is not easy. I know that every single day you wake up and you have to, drive through a town that's been taken from your people and watch this world crumble around you. That the racism just pops up like red flags 10,000 times a day. And to just make it to dinner is a lot. And so if you can make it to dinner and then also express yourself and enter into those spaces and open your mouth and still love yourself, still think like you're a good thing and you can make it. God, you're doing good. You're doing so good, and you're doing that work. And that Fawn goes and does what she does every single day. And that you enter into those spaces and speak and teach these young people and pass on this knowledge. Those things are vital. And if, we can't spend our time, what frustrates me a lot about Indigenous communities is how often we pull each other down and how much we need to push each other up, because we really need everybody to be at their best and to do their work, because we all have work to do. We all have real important work to do, and we all need to be doing that work, and if we can love each other into those spaces, it's better than hurting each other, and I think my Aunt Nora is an artist, and she calls this thing called chopped liver syndrome. And I really like it, because sometimes I go like, oh, I'm dealing with chopped liver syndrome. And when I start feeling chopped liver syndrome is when I start getting jealous, or I start getting grouchy, or I start being like a little snappy at people, you know? And when I'm loving myself and I feel supported, I don't have chopped liver syndrome and I'm not being an awful person, you know, in response to that. And so I feel like, you know, if I can support and love the people around me, then they're gonna have less chopped liver syndrome and not just spreads. You know what I mean? Like, let's not do that. We have enough. Does that answer?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, just thinking about that because, you know, Stacy Montooth, for those that don't know Stacy, she's the head of the Nevada Indian Commission and just an amazing human. But yeah, definitely feeling, you know, that specifically when you mentioned that it's not typical, you know, for to see, you know, 3 Indigenous people sitting next to each other, supporting each other, and it's all love. And, you know, I do feel that in my world a lot, but I definitely am recognize when, yeah, the crab's in the barrel, you know, when you get a certain way and then people just want to pull you down, and your own people could tear you down faster than any enemy could. And it's sad and it's hurtful and it's awful. And, you know, I have noticed, you know, that there is, you know, even within our communities, you know, other Indigenous people who are just, you know, talking bad, or, you know, like another sister tearing down another sister, you know, for what? Like, I feel like it's bad medicine. It is such bad medicine, you know, so I try not to, you know, kind of take part in those talks, or at least try to temper them. Within my community, I've been, you know, within my spaces, I've actually done call-in circles. You know, we don't promote it or place it out there like, okay, we did this moderating. But, you know, we're able to have these conversations, these really tough talks, because, you know, we have to be here for each other. Our Indigenous community, our Native community is really small. And, I mean, even recently, just a week ago or so, you know, just meeting with a person who, you know, we deleted each other, we're, you know, not seeing eye to eye, and, you know, he's a really strong personality, but, you know what, so am I. And, you know, we decided to, like, all right, we're gonna part ways, you're over there, I'm over here, you know, whatever. And it's like, dang, he's annoying, he's hell of annoying. But, you know, he's not my enemy. And when he came to my space with his fiance, and she's an artist and super amazing, I was all happy to meet her. And then just talk with him too, and, like, I guess for better or worse terms, bury the hatchet. And be able to talk and, like, all right, look, you're not my enemy. You're not these, you know, these child molesters that are out there. You're not these destroyers of the earth that are out there. You know, you're my Native Indigenous brother. And anytime I've had a bad thought about you, I've also prayed for you. You know, and him the same for me. You know, and so, you know, I don't just say that for, like, you know, because for Native women, but Native men too, in our Native community. I think it's really important that we support each other and lift each other up. And if there are, you know, negative words or harms, that we confront each other in a good way and be able to be open to have those conversations. And, you know, because I'm not perfect either. Like, absolutely, I've been called in. Like, hey, I didn't like when you did that. Or I was like, what? And, oh, I said, oh, dang, that was really bad. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. You know, and being able to humble yourself and to, you know, even admit wrongs too. And, you know, so when I sit here on this panel, you know, with these women and with the women who were with us earlier too, you know, just realizing, recognizing that this, I don't want to say it's rare, but it should be the normal. This should be, you know, how we always support each other and lift each other up. This should always be how we gather, you know, in this, dare I say, ceremonial way, to where we're respecting each other's thoughts and breath and voice. And yeah, I do admire the people that are here. Everybody was chosen for a reason. And this is a show that I curated and was very thoughtful about everybody who was within it. I knew I wanted to, you know, center, like, Great Basin artists, but it's not just us here. I don't want to be in this colonial, you know, structure of state, like only the state of Nevada, when our paths have crossed all through the Southwest. And, you know, the women who are here are the women that I've admired and looked up to over the years. Probably they haven't known it, but, you know, I was one of those Native artists that looked up to Cara. and Rose and Roxanne, and I was just like, wow, these badass Indigenous women are just really doing it. And when I met with Rose in her studio, and over the summer we spent some time, and just seeing her and all the things that she's doing, just like keeps on. I was just like, you're doing it for all of us Native women. Even when you feel tired, it's not just you and Nugget and your family, your lineage that you're doing this for, but it's every Native female, male, anything, artist, that's looked up to you, and all the work that you're doing, you're going to surpass and go further. You're out of the country now. You're just smashing all of these ceilings and just going so far, and it's just amazing as an Indigenous artist to see another woman doing that and doing it brilliantly and so fucking cool. So yeah, I like the artist.
Can I just say that I think one of the reasons that we tend to do that is because we're struggling. And when you're struggling, there's a lot of serious things you're dealing with. They're very serious. And it's really hard to sometimes not take something seriously or not take it to heart, because everything is really heartfelt and it's really heavy. A lot of this journey is heavy. And so that's why I think what Fawn was saying about humor, if we can laugh at ourselves and laugh at, it's super vital, super, super vital when we can, for a minute, let that struggle go and not take it so personally, But when your whole world is that serious, it's really hard to separate that out. And I think, I think what you're saying about, I really like the blooper roll of our journey. Like, I really want to see that. Like, how can we begin to find joy and humor and come back around to what's the point of all this in the end, right? Like, why are we here? And what's the point of it is when we find those silly spaces to goof off, Can we do that and have fun and remember, what we love. Sorry, but I thought that. Thank you, Fawn. I'm trying to hear it. It's hard. Appreciate it.
Thanks. And Noel, you had a question?
I feel kind of dorky asking it now because that was like a really good ending. But could you guys talk a little bit about where materials and process and where you find comfort or you're comfortable operating in your materials and process?
I will repeat the question. Noel is asking, where do you find comfort with material and process? I got that right?
The first thing that comes to mind is when I'm going and getting beads. So I do a lot of bead work. So when I go to the store, or if it's been a while, but go to a powwow and get supplies. I have that thing. I think a lot of beaders or a lot of like native people have that thing. See like all these beautiful beads, hanks of beads. They're like millions, billions of beads, and it's just like it's like a kid in a candy store. I just love it so much. It gives me all the feels. So there's something about that kind of really intentional acquiring of materials, and then I feel like there's also I feel really safe in the studio, like by myself actually. So I can, because that space to me is very, I need it to be safe. I need to be, I feel like that's where I can process everything that I'm making work about. And I think of art almost like I connect it to like therapy. It's my own therapy in some ways. I know that therapy is kind of a controversial thing, but I think of it as having the capacity to heal. And so for me, something like beadwork or even sewing and working with materials, using my hands to make something beautiful, I think that is really powerful, and I don't know what I would do if I didn't do that. I don't know if that answers the question.
We're getting Natani beads for Christmas.
I love them.
So yummy. I think that in a world where I don't feel like I can control too much, I feel really scared and confused and overwhelmed and frustrated often, that in my studio I can decide, and when I get my piece and the aesthetic is in my power completely. And when it feels like, when you shift it a little to the left and it's perfect, and that feeling of chunk and it fits, is like you said, it's healing, and it makes me feel like something's gonna be all right, yeah.
I feel that comfort in materiality, especially when it comes to soft sculpture. And I think soft sculpture is definitely something I'm going to lean a bit more on because it just feels good. I just love the fabrics, the sumptuousness, velvets, ribbons, the sound of things, and I'm really loving Natani's work that's in the exhibit right now because, well, she's also like how I've used like t-shirt materials and sinew. The soft sculpture she sent had. Well, you'll see it. You'll see it in the exhibit because we're going to stroll over there afterwards. But I love the feeling of materials and different textures, and when something has a certain sound to it, I just have to have something has to be like within my hands, within my grasp, and I know that when you go into museum spaces or you're not supposed to touch the materials. But I want people to want to touch them. I would like people to think about that looks like it's rough or has a hard texture to it. I wonder what it feels like. So yeah, I really like working with that, in many different ways and mediums, the materiality, and that feels really good to me.
And just to quickly add on, because I could talk about this for a long time, but this magic moment, I think you're both kind of describing it when you describe it like when it kind of clicks together. Yeah, I describe those moments where two materials that are kind of separate or have been maybe even off to the side of the studio, and then one day I'll walk in and just bring the two things together, and they just click, and it that moment. It's all about that moment, and I feel like I'm constantly searching for that moment in each one of the pieces, and it feels right, and I feel like I was supposed to be the one to put them together. And then I was once asked too, when do you feel the most beautiful or the most confident? And I was that was a really hard question to answer because I feel like I walk in the world and I'll feel insecure, I'll feel imposter syndrome, or I'll feel just be having a shitty ass day and I'll feel really bad and not feel good at all. But when I'm making work, that's when I feel the most beautiful and the most the best version of me. And so that's when I know that's what I was born to do, that's what I'm supposed to do. It gives me a lot of comfort because it gives me a purpose. I feel like, okay, I'm supposed to be here, because I haven't always felt that way. So yeah, that's how I know that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
I love that. Can I add one? Yeah. I sometimes wonder, when I finished my El Camino, I was parked in the yard and I brought out a folding chair and I sat there and I looked at her and I was like, there's no way that thing came from me, right? There was this oh, she's dead, and there's no way me could have made that, right? And it hit me that maybe that 1985 Chevy El Camino was parked on the side of the road and said, hey, I need you to make me who I'm supposed to be. And I was just this tool, right? So maybe those beads are actually calling you. And maybe the soft shapes are actually calling you. And maybe this clay is Rose, I need you to make me become so I can do my job in the world. And so maybe the relationship isn't actually us, but it's, we're not necessarily the ones in charge, but we're actually the tools to manifest its being, you know?
Word. Any other questions or concluding thoughts? Yeah.
Just a quick practical question. I'm curious how long this particular exhibit is available to the public, and if there are any ways that you feel are particularly potent or powerful in terms of how you would like people to share the work, whether it's social media or pressuring faculty, or just how you would like that to look in terms of the community sharing your work.
So the exhibit in the Donna Beam is up until December 10th. Because the person asked how long the exhibit is up. And as an instructor, because I can speak to that, bring your students. Yeah. And so in terms of social media, because you also asked about social media, are you asking about where you can find their work, or where you can find, or if those exhibit is on social media?
Whether or not, I guess I'm asking for, is there a desire to share the work for somebody that's viewing it? If I wanted to share the work, say with family, with friends, and the impact that it's made, are there preferences around how to do that, or ways that you feel that there would, you know, that it would be more potent?
In every way. In every way. It's meant to be shared. This is our work. This is that wall that we produced here. It's not just for the Native audience, it's for everybody. And it's only going to be here till December 10th. So it's open, the Donna Beam Gallery is open Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. till 4 p.m. So come at any of those operating hours. And yeah, if you want to share it on Instagram, Twitter, whatever, you know, social media that you use, you know, please do. It's been shared. Actually, if you, I don't know if there's a weekly stand here, but the Las Vegas Weekly recently shared an article about it. So you can pick that up. And yeah, please share with anyone that you can, because there's a lot of storytelling throughout the exhibit, and I can boast that it is beautiful. I am very, very proud of the work that we've all, you know, brought to the table, and really happy to share it. In fact, just taking being cognizant of time right now, the gallery is open until 4, and I know that we've slightly gone over a little bit of time, but that's okay. These conversations are so important. But also I wanted to invite all of you to the Native American Alumni Club's reception at the TAM Alumni Building, and that's going to be starting at 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. So, you know, please enjoy the gallery. And they're going to close for an hour, but it opens throughout the nights till like 10 p.m. for Art Walk.
Thank you. And go see the exhibits and join us for the reception. Thank you all.